I would never, ever in a million years wish for any parent to go through it.
There's not one part of this story that is not truly unbelievable. They almost completely ruined our chances of ever knowing what happened to our daughter.
Kevin Fox called 911 to report his missing daughter. By nightfall, he was in an interrogation room accused of killing her. How does a grieving father become the prime suspect in his own child's murder? And what happens when the justice system gets it devastatingly wrong? This is the story of Riley Fox, a bright, brown-eyed 3-year-old whose disappearance shattered a family, shook a town, and how one mother who refused to let the truth die with her daughter. It's a story about exposing one of the most haunting failures in modern criminal investigation.
Nearly the entire town had already heard that little Riley was missing.
It began in a town where nothing bad was ever supposed to happen. But by the time the truth came out, everything had already changed. Kevin Fox woke up to every parent's worst nightmare. His 3-year-old daughter Riley was gone. One moment, she had been asleep on the couch after a late-night home from a family event. Next, she had vanished without a sound. At first, there was hope. Maybe Riley had wandered off. Maybe she was hiding. But as the hours passed and the search grew more frantic, the fear settled in. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Something terrible had happened. Kevin Fox was a good dad. He was sure about that. Not always perfect, perhaps, but he loved his kids more than almost anything else in the entire universe. Worked hard, he did his best to show up, and split duties neatly down the middle with Melissa, his wife and partner. Their kids, Tyler and Riley, were still toddlers. Tyler discovered his voice when he was 6, but Riley was a baby girl. 3 years old, but already she has left her imprint on their lives. Her laugh was contagious. Her brown eyes were wide with awe.
Watch where you're going. What?
When she was smiling, which was most of the time, it was as if the rest of the world was paused momentarily. The night before terror commenced was normal in all regards that mattered. Kevin and Melissa attended a benefit dinner hosted by a friend in town. The kind of small-town affair where everyone knew each other, where folks drank, swapped stories, and contributed to a worthy cause. Kevin was dragged along reluctantly. He was beat, and the kids were a handful at all times. But Melissa had been insistent. "We need this," she said, so he agreed reluctantly. It would be a respite, a brief reminder of life's normalcy. They left the children back at Melissa's mother's place when they left, returned later that evening to pick her up as well as Riley, and brought her in around midnight. The house was quiet when they came in. Kevin carried Riley in, her head resting lightly on his shoulder, her warm breath on his neck. She was such a deep sleeper that she didn't even stir when he placed her easily onto the living room sofa. The plan was to put her to bed after both of them were settled. Fatigue later caught up with him. Kevin dozed, and by the time morning came, everything had changed. Kevin woke up just after 8 a.m., the sun already peeking through the blinds. Melissa was still half asleep. When he got up and stretched, his eyes fell to the empty couch. Riley wasn't there. It hadn't sunk in right away. Maybe she had gone into her room already. Maybe Melissa had already moved her. "You put Riley to bed, didn't you?" Melissa blinked slowly, confused. "No, I thought you did." A shiver ran down Kevin's chest. He yelled her name, racing through the house first frantically, then hysterically. "Riley?" There was nothing. He checked the bedrooms, the bathrooms, the closets, the garage. Nothing. He ran, bare feet on the sidewalk, scouring the yard, sidewalk, shouting more loudly now. "Riley!" Nothing added up. She was 3 years old, too little even to be able to reach the lock on the front door. His hand shook as he called 911 in a matter of minutes. "My daughter is missing," he told the dispatcher, a trace of panic creeping into his voice. "She's 3. I can't find her." The tone of the dispatcher immediately changed. "Stay on the line, sir. Help is coming." And from that call, the terror began in earnest. He was there in minutes. Kevin paced back and forth around the yard by then, his eyes wide, his face pale. Melissa was sobbing. Tyler, disoriented in his pajamas, hugged his stuffed animal on the porch steps. The officer was patient, asking questions slowly. What was Riley dressed in? When was the last time you remember seeing her? Was there something unusual that caught your attention? He answered as best he could, but the questions only served to heighten fear. No, the door was not closed. No, nothing was heard or seen. Yes, Riley was sleeping on the sofa right here, and she was missing now. Word spread fast in a community like Wilmington. Neighbors were already involved by 9 a.m. Dozens were scouring by 10, searching through fields, backyards, adjacent woods, and along the forked creek bank. Helicopters circled above. Police dogs were called in. Flyers were made and circulated within hours. Everyone was doing what they could to assist. And then, at 11:45 a.m., a sharp scream broke the silence. Search volunteers froze. Officers ran. Forked Creek, midday sun. And there, half submerged in the murky water, was a child. Face down, wearing nothing but a pair of small yellow panties. No movement, no sound. It was Riley Fox, just 3 years old, and gone forever. Police taped off the scene. Helicopters were flying lower now. They set up a crime scene tent. The mood of the day was transformed from lively to serious. Kevin fainted when officers informed him of the news. Melissa screamed. The cry of a mourning mother who has lost a child cannot be put into words. It was not a cry, but a scream in your bone marrow. People across the street wept when they heard it. Riley Fox was discovered. It was not, however, to be the outcome for which everyone had prayed. The streets in Wilmington were closed down. A lively, laughing town was in a state of shock now. There were flags half-masted. Children were at home. Strangers hugged in grocery stores. No one knew what to say about what happened. A 3-year-old girl, yanked from her bed in the dead of night and discovered dead in a creek bed. It didn't make sense. It destroyed faith. It gave rise to fear. Individuals locked the doors behind themselves. Security lights were put in place. Rumors were spreading about who might have been behind it all. On everyone's lips was a horrifying question. Who was behind this? The death was automatically declared a homicide by the police.
When Kevin Fox's little girl Riley disappeared from their Wilmington, Illinois home in the dark of night and turned up dead in a nearby creek in June 2004, the young father's world collapsed.
The autopsy would later verify what investigators had been assuming. Riley was sexually attacked, her wrists taped together using duct tape, then drowned. She was still alive when she was submerged in water. The viciousness of it was almost unthinkable. Even veteran detectives were disturbed. State and municipal authorities descended upon the investigation. In came the FBI. The public, grieving and in a state of hysteria, clamored for answers. The Foxes were stunned, defeated, as they coped in the aftermath of sheer tragedy. Kevin would scarcely utter a single word. Melissa didn't sleep a wink. Tyler, in shock, too young to grasp the dimensions, kept asking when Riley was coming back. But as the question grew, a surprise came along. The circle of distrust was beginning to close, not around a stranger, but around Kevin.
When I think of Riley, I picture her on Kevin's shoulders. She was always a daddy's girl.
It started quietly at first. More precise questions from the officers now. I want to know more about his relationship with Riley. What his evening was like, when he'd seen her last. By days later, it was obvious. Kevin Fox, a 911 caller, a tearful man from television footage, pleading with his daughter to come back safely, was a suspect. They gave various reasons. No signs of forced entry were present. The back door latch was broken, yes, but it has been broken for weeks. No neighbors heard or saw anything unusual. Kevin was the last to see Riley alive, and most guilty in their opinion. Statistically, when a child is murdered, the murderer is a close family member. To the detectives, Kevin's account checked out. It was of no concern to Melissa. She was furious. Kevin loved Riley. He never once hit her in anger. They were no perfect family. Whose was? But Kevin was a present, gentle dad. That he was capable of such things was absurd. But the officials would not listen to Melissa. They were building a case. Grieving for his daughter, Kevin willingly came in to talk to the police. He wanted to help. He wanted to clear his name. More than anything, he wanted justice for Riley's murderer. He was brought to an interrogation room where he never left for 14 hours.
Kevin says the police came to him during his interrogation and said, look, either you're this cold-blooded baby killer, in which case it's life in prison.
He was questioned aggressively. No food, no lawyer, no sleep, no way out. The detectives fed him falsehoods as facts. Forensic evidence, they claimed, placed him at the scene. Melissa was against him, they said. The death penalty was on the table. Emotionally broken, tearful, exhausted, and terror-stricken, Kevin found himself feeling as if the nightmare engulfed him. Then something came along. That confession? It wasn't real, and soon the truth would unravel everything they thought they knew. Not because of something I've ever accomplished, but because I'm fractured. Because he thought in a fleeting instant that only by confessing would he ever escape from the torture. Perhaps, maybe, if he would only say what was being demanded of him, he would get to see Melissa. Tyler. Breathe again. The detectives filled in the confession form. Kevin, stunned, signed the paper in a hollow silence. But what he didn't know was DNA would soon tell a very different story. He confessed to having killed Riley by accident and covering up her death. It was a contradictory admission. Facts that didn't align with evidence. Testimony that contradicted witness timelines. But the detectives had what they required.
So then he said, well, he would make it look like a stranger had come in and done this, stages, if you will, a sexual assault.
He was arrested and was formally charged with first-degree murder and predatory sexual assault. The news hit the town like a bombshell. People were stunned. They were horrified. How could a dad, this dad, do something like that? Do you believe Kevin would have confessed if they'd given him a lawyer? Tell us in the comments, how would you have handled 14 hours of pressure with no escape? Melissa was livid. Her husband was not a murderer. She knew as sure as she was breathing. Kevin loved Riley more than existence. Every single night, he had wept himself to sleep since she disappeared. Barely eating, scarcely keeping his grip on life. And now he was being depicted as a monster. She stood helplessly watching as he was led from the police station in handcuffs, head down, through a volley of camera flashes. The community that had stood by the Foxes during earlier times shunned them now. Whispers were heard in grocery store aisles. Children were hugged close by their parents. They walked across the street when they encountered Melissa. Shame replaced sorrow shortly thereafter. However, Melissa never gave up. She initiated a new sort of fight, both for Riley as well as Kevin. Melissa never imagined she'd become a legal fighter. She was a wife, a mom, a woman who, once upon a time, organized parties on her children's birthdays and worried about grocery lists, not defense attorneys and depositions. Something inside her hardened, though, after Kevin was locked up. As her sorrow didn't abate, it centered around her. But Melissa wasn't just grieving. She was about to become the system's worst nightmare. She started by hiring private attorneys. She phoned forensic experts. She chased down news leads and began to speak, softly at first, then louder. She would not let Kevin be buried under the avalanche of lies and assumptions. The same investigators who had once promised justice for Riley were now withholding evidence, denying facts, and twisting her family into a grotesque drama. Melissa knew the sole way out was to draw out the truth, piece by painful piece. One of the first things she requested was DNA testing. Early in the case, there was evidence of duct tape on Riley's body. There was other physical evidence from the scene that had been collected as well. For reasons that appeared more strategic than scientific, the police had not tested it yet. Melissa insisted that the evidence be independently tested. The process lasted months. In the meantime, Kevin sat in a cell with men who believed the worst about him. He was the dad who killed his daughter in the outside world. Can you imagine grieving your daughter while being accused of her murder? In prison, he was dealt with even worse. Men who are accused of child offenses tend to go through their hell within the prison walls. Kevin endured threats, isolation, and sleepless nights looking at the ceiling and questioning how his life had been so violently derailed. He missed Thanksgiving, Christmas, Tyler's 7th birthday. He got pictures in the mail from his son and letters from Melissa that said, "Hold on, they would battle this together." But there were days when Kevin did not want to battle. There were days he wanted it all to just be over. He was not suicidal, no. But he was exhausted. So exhausted. The DNA test wait was like waiting forever. Then, finally, in early 2005, they arrived. And they changed everything. The DNA on the duct tape and Riley's body did not belong to Kevin. It did not even come close. It was the profile of an unknown male, a stranger. Kevin was innocent. The confession that had been the detective's crown jewel was now exposed for what it was, a false, coerced narrative created under pressure.
Put us in separate cop cars. It felt strange. I didn't understand what was going on.
The science didn't lie. The system, it now seemed, had. How many more innocent people are sitting in prison right now just because someone needed a quick conviction? Kevin was freed after 8 months in jail for a crime he did not commit. His homecoming was subdued. No parade, no banners. Just Melissa and Tyler were waiting outside the prison, clinging to each other as the man they loved walked out of its gates, older and thinner, but finally free.
Happy, I'm excited.
We knew he didn't do anything wrong, and we knew that that would eventually come out.
They cried together, all 3 of them. Yet freedom did not erase the trauma. Kevin couldn't sleep in his bed. He flinched when the door slammed. He couldn't get past people still looking at him in the supermarket. Some apologized, but most avoided him altogether. The damage was already done. Melissa, as always determined, found it wasn't sufficient to simply be free. There had to be accountability. She and Kevin sued the Will County Sheriff's Office and detectives who wrongly arrested and charged him in a federal civil rights lawsuit. The lawsuit claimed malicious prosecution, infringement upon constitutional rights, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The case dragged on for years, but ultimately the jury found in favor of the Fox family. They were granted $15.5 million, the highest civil rights award in Illinois history up to then. But no sum of money could restore Riley, and the person who had murdered her was still on the loose. After Kevin's exoneration, the case of Riley's murder was reopened. But this time, the case moved more slowly. Investigators were more cautious now, chastened by the public outcry and media scrutiny that had followed their mistakes. The public demanded answers, but after the wrongful arrest, there was less confidence in law enforcement's capacity to deliver them. The sole physical evidence remaining was the DNA, the unknown male profile that had exonerated Kevin. It was submitted to the National DNA Database, but months went by without a match. Could Riley's killer have been caught sooner if the police had listened to the evidence from the beginning? The murderer had never been arrested for a felony. He had no name. He was still at large. Kevin and Melissa tried to put together the fragments of their life. It wasn't easy. The trauma lingered. Riley's bedroom was left untouched for months, her toys set neatly on the shelves, her favorite blanket folded at the foot of her bed. Tyler withdrew, became quiet. He started sleeping with the lights on. He missed his sister and was confused as to why adults had lied about his dad. Kevin, still fragile, kept walking on his own for hours. Sometimes he'd stop at Forked Creek and simply gaze into the water. He'd replay that morning repeatedly in his head. I wonder what he could have done differently, wishing that he knew why Riley needed to be taken at all. Melissa, a fighter through and through, directed her grief into purpose. She started speaking out publicly, not only regarding Riley's homicide, but also regarding wrongful convictions, abuse of power by police, and the need for DNA testing. She aligned with advocacy groups and started working with other families who were dealing with miscarriages of justice. Years passed, and then a name emerged from the darkness. In 2008, 4 years exactly after Riley's death, there was a breakthrough. DNA technology advancements and larger national databases later yielded a match. The profile in the Riley case was matched to Scott Eby, a male. Eby was 38, a convicted burglar, a registered sex offender.
That this arrest shows that Kevin Fox is completely innocent. He had no connection with this person.
He'd been living a few miles from where Riley was murdered at the time, in his sister's house, which bordered the very creek where Riley was found. He was never on the radar of the investigators. As police started digging into his background, the puzzle pieces started falling into place. When Riley vanished that night, Eby was drunk and stoned. He went on to confess he was walking the neighborhood in search of houses to break into. He came across the Fox residence. The latch on the back door was broken. The chance presented itself. There, he discovered Riley asleep on the sofa. The circumstances of what transpired next are nearly too terrible to detail. Eby kidnapped Riley. He drove her to a derelict bathroom block in a local park where he sexually attacked her. Afterwards, out of fear that she would report him, he drove her to Forked Creek and drowned her. She was 3 years old. When faced with the DNA evidence, Eby confessed. It was graphic. It was heartbreaking. It was final. Scott Eby pleaded guilty in federal court in 2010, 6 years after Riley was killed. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Kevin and Melissa were present to listen to his confession. They did not cry at the hearing. They had no tears left. They could only sit and hold hands while the man who had shattered their world detailed how he had done it. There was no feeling of closure, no relief, only silence. When Scott Eby entered a guilty plea in November 2010, it was a bizarre kind of relief for the Fox family. It wasn't closure, not really. Nothing could undo what had happened, of course. But for the first time in years, there was a sense of a conclusion to the nightmare. There would be no long trial, no defense lawyers making excuses, no perverse explanation of what had happened to Riley. Eby had confessed. He had admitted in horrific and terrifying detail to the abduction, assault, and murder of their daughter.
I guess I got it into my head to go rob people.
And now he would be spending the rest of his life behind bars. But even with justice finally served, the pain of Riley's absence remained. Can justice really heal the wounds of a family? Or does it just remind them of everything they've lost? For Kevin and Melissa, there was no easy answer. Their daughter was gone. Kevin had been falsely accused and imprisoned. Their friends had abandoned them. And now, the man who had caused it all would spend the rest of his life with 3 meals a day, sunshine, while Riley was 6 feet beneath the ground. Kevin did not say much in the days following the sentencing. When he did, it was often short, his voice low. He felt like a specter in his own house. Though he had been cleared of wrongdoing, the experience of jail, the solitude, the psychological abuse, the terror, had etched itself into his marrow. He'd wake up sweating sometimes, convinced someone was still monitoring him. He shunned mirrors. He did not care for the man he saw there anymore. Melissa attempted to stick to their routines, if only for Tyler's sake. She cooked breakfast, assisted with homework, and ironed clothes with a sort of robot-like competence. Yet there were times when the silence struck too harshly. When she'd open the linen closet and spot one of Riley's blankets shoved behind a pile of towels, and abruptly she couldn't breathe. And Wilmington had changed. Some of their neighbors, who had whispered behind their backs before, now tried to offer half-hearted apologies in the form of empty words or unwanted casseroles. Others avoided them, unable to handle the shame of having assumed the worst. The media had moved on quickly after E.B.'s conviction. No headlines were shouting Kevin's innocence with the same enthusiasm that had heralded his arrest. No bold print retractions, no justice for their reputations. Just a quiet shrug of finality. But Kevin and Melissa weren't about to let the silence prevail. They knew very well that if it could happen to them, it could happen to anybody. Kevin started going for long drives in the middle of the night. He said it cleared his head, but Melissa knew he was running. Not from her, not even from town, but from the guilt that still clung to him, innocent though he was. He'd sit there oftentimes, parked near Forked Creek, staring at the water, agonized over the realization that this was the last place Riley had been alive. He'd sit sometimes for hours, windows down, radio off. Just silence and the soft gurgling noise of water over stone. What seemed strange to him, he thought, was how peaceful the creek was after having seen what it had seen. He hadn't returned to work. The prospect of resuming a normal routine was alien, even sadistic. He was a broken man leading another man's life. Melissa saw it all happening, and she did not know how to fix it. She suggested counseling. He agreed, but never went. She tried talking about Riley. Sometimes he listened. Sometimes he walked away. 8-year-old Tyler walked around them both on tiptoes. He had taken to sleeping in their bedroom again, curled up at the foot of the bed like a puppy who couldn't get warm. He didn't ask as many questions anymore, but he never let Melissa leave a room without knowing where she was going. At school, he drew pictures of his family, always including Riley next to him, smiling. Melissa tried to keep them all grounded, but the grief was heavy. And Kevin, for all his strength, was still weighed down not just with the death of a child, but with the burden of injustice no man should ever have to bear. One evening, as Tyler slept, Kevin finally spoke up, ending his silence. "She died, and I also disappeared afterwards." Melissa didn't have words to comfort Kevin, so she simply sat next to him, and something shifted in silence. They started talking hesitantly and confronted pain together. Melissa started writing down everything, resolved to share their story, not only for Riley, but for both of them. Their sorrow turned into a purpose. She discovered her voice in courtrooms and conferences, speaking out about a broken system that tore her family apart. Something like what happened to them was not rare. It was what a broken system produced. When she was finally able to talk, people would listen.
But there's disgusting people like him here.
The Foxes established the Riley Fox Foundation in 2011 to end false confessions and make a change in how missing child cases are handled more effectively. It was their way of taking the pain and making a purpose of it. Melissa stood as a voice of change, sharing their story to promote accountability and change. Kevin, once silent, also made his voice heard, sharing about the destruction of wrongful imprisonment and being wrongly accused of being a monster.
I still had people coming up to me and saying I was a child killer, a child molester.
They worked together as a united front, partnered with the Innocence Project, advocated for state reforms, and helped train police to avoid making the same mistakes that nearly destroyed their family. They were no longer a survivor, but an advocate. Despite all the growing admiration and notoriety, the wounds to the Foxes never really healed. Kevin lingered before going outside. Melissa double-checked every lock. Tyler had to have his parents repeatedly assure him that they were nearby. They were recovering, but there was still trauma. Added to this was selective press reporting. The Globe wept when Kevin was hauled in handcuffs, but purred when he was acquitted. Headlines declared him a monster. When he was exonerated by DNA,
DNA tests eventually excluded Kevin Fox as a suspect, and he was released after 8 months.
when his actual killer came forward to confess, there were no sensational backtracks, no rehabilitation of his image. Melissa summarized, "They built the lie, but were not interested in the truth." Kevin carried a stoic reserve. He never ranted in sporadic interviews, simply matter-of-factly explained the failure that nearly destroyed his life. They listened to him because he never yelled, not because he did. Scott Eby, by contrast, faded into silence behind bars, offering no apologies, no excuses, just a flat, categorical acknowledgement that left the Foxes to endure what he had created.
Started panicking, and then I kept telling myself, like, this can't be.
It was immaterial to Kevin whether Scott was remorseful or not. Remorse cannot erase what he has done, he once told Melissa. What bothered him more was how easily the system failed, not only by indicting him, but by almost destroying him as a human being. The individual who entered into that interrogation room was different from he who came out 8 months later. Behind the shame, fear, and sorrow, Kevin knew that if not for Melissa standing up for his rights, he'd be sitting in jail today. That never faded from his mind. So he started coming forward, not as a dad to Riley, but as a guy who had lived through the unconscionable. He spoke to law school classes, to policemen, to advocacy groups, insisting that wrongful accusations were not the exception, but a reality. By 2011, a new mission was discovered by the Foxes. No longer survivors, but now crusaders. The Riley Fox Foundation was a call for justice to be heard from coast to coast. In school classrooms and state capitals, Kevin and Melissa reminded everyone. Riley's story would never be forgotten, nor would theirs. Melissa never imagined she would be speaking to legislators, but she did, repeatedly. She told them of Kevin's 14-hour interrogation without a lawyer, without food, without mercy. What fear, what despair had driven him to a false confession? It was a simple message. It could have happened to anybody, and she made a difference.
I would never, ever in a million years wish for any parent to go through it.
It was a milestone in 2013, partly because of Riley's case, when Illinois passed a law requiring all homicide interrogations to be recorded from start to finish, a safeguard that was not there when Kevin was bullied into confessing. Melissa stood on the Capitol steps when that happened. It was not the justice they'd originally sought, but something nonetheless. Not as outspoken, but no less determined, was Kevin, who explained, matter-of-factually, how much he nearly lost. Not out of guilt, but as a victim of a rush to judgment by the system. They banded together, joining innocence groups, training law enforcers, and comforting bereaved families. And they would not let Riley become a headline. Melissa reminded everyone, always. She was not a victim. She was a daughter of theirs. She loved Elmo. She hated peas. She thought that ketchup added flavor to anything. By sharing those plain facts, the world learned not only of a crime, but a little girl so dearly loved, and a family that would never let her be forgotten. By sharing their story, suffering, and strife, Kevin and Melissa gave life to Riley's spirit, not in remembrance, but in significant purpose. Her life was a tragedy, but also an educational device. In 2014, a Springfield Police Academy adopted Kevin's interrogation video to train new officers in bias and coercive confessions. Recruits observe his fatigue, hear his voice tremble in fear, and are asked a single question: would you have stopped this? It was agonizing to relive those tapes for Kevin, flashbacks as authentic as possible, shame still fresh in his mind. But to learn that it might change things later made it tolerable. Melissa, his constant companion, was by his side during all that time. She understood that if Riley's death might save an innocent human being from having their life broken by the system, then that was something. Even at home, his child, Tyler, was still coming of age in the shadow of loss. Riley's pink blanket he wore as armor, a soothing, frayed shield against a world that briefly hardened around him. Melissa, worryingly, had employed a counselor to help ease him through his mourning. Tyler would talk of the day the creek got scary, and of dreams in which he still heard Riley's voice. There were friendly kids at school. Others would retell mean gossip that carried on regardless. But at home, Kevin and Melissa reminded Tyler that he knew the facts. His dad was innocent, his family was strong, and Riley's ordeal, as distressful as it was now assisting others. The Riley Fox Foundation expanded unobtrusively from Illinois to a source of help for troubled families by 2015, when chapters in 3 states were instructing volunteers to guide families through the chaos of a missing child case, counseling, helping through contacts with law enforcement, and ensuring nothing was forgotten, much as was originally done for Riley. The group also provided monthly bereavement groups where Melissa attended regularly. She didn't share everything, but her mere presence as a survivor of unutterable loss comforted other grieving parents. Her being strong enough to endure gave others room to grieve and still have a sense of hope to cling to. Kevin also found a way to help himself. He conducted private counseling sessions for men victimized by fabricated claims. It was difficult initially to revisit such pain. Kevin realized that telling his story empowered others. "If my voice can save somebody through that darkness," he said to a group, "then each tear was worth it." Their work created legislative traction. In 2016, a bill was introduced to create a child protection unit in the Illinois State Police that would interview children in a safe, neutral manner. Melissa also publicly spoke up, along with legislators, using her family's experience to call for meaningful reform. And through it all, Riley remained at the center of their lives. Vacations, dinners, holidays, all carried her memory. When Tyler reached middle school, he asked to join the Foundation's youth program. He wanted to teach kids about internet safety and looking out for each other. They said yes. with pride and quiet tears. On his first day speaking to his peers, Tyler stood before a room of 7th graders and held up Riley's faded pink blanket. "My sister loved this," he said, voice steady. "She lost it that day at the creek. It was all she had left." Then with quiet strength, he added, "We belong to her blanket now, our family, and we keep it safe so no one else has to lose what they love." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Over time, the Fox family came to understand that their lives would never return to what they once were. But they also realized that even in deep tragedy, there could be purpose. Riley had only lived 3 short years, but her story had traveled far, carried by the love and resilience of her family. Kevin still woke from nightmares. Melissa still checked the locks. Tyler still clutched the blanket. But alongside the pain, there was progress. New laws, safer investigations, and families that had been spared the same fate. And in the background of every small victory, they could still hear Riley's laughter. A soft, distant echo that reminded them why they kept going. By spring of 2017, Wilmington had begun to shift. The quiet town, once shaken by horror, was slowly learning to heal. The police department now had a victim advocate trained in how to speak to children with care. Interrogations were recorded, standard practice now. Flyers in the station read, "Every voice matters," a quiet but powerful reflection of the changes Riley's story had made possible. Melissa returned to the station often, not as a mother in mourning, but as a trusted advisor. She watched mock interviews, offered gentle corrections, and reminded officers how to listen with empathy. She hadn't chosen this role, but she had earned it, and her voice now carried the kind of weight that could change lives. One afternoon, after a training session, a young officer approached Melissa. Nervous but sincere, he thanked her. "Because of you, I won't make the same mistakes my predecessors did." Melissa glanced at the screen, still showing a taped interview. She nodded slowly, fighting back emotion. "Thank you for listening," she said. In that quiet moment, all the years of pain, effort, and advocacy finally felt seen. Kevin, too, had found his role in healing others. At the same jail where he'd once sat accused, he now led weekly support groups for men awaiting trial. He taught them how to protect themselves, how to ask for a lawyer, how to demand recordings, and most importantly, how to preserve their dignity. Some were skeptical at first, but most kept coming back, recognizing the value in Kevin's lived truth. At home, the rhythm of life continued, still shadowed by Riley's absence, but no longer consumed by it. Tyler, now 12, had matured into a thoughtful, confident young man. He didn't carry Riley's pink blanket everywhere anymore, but it stayed close, resting on a chair like a quiet promise. When he spoke to classmates or foundation groups, he did so with purpose, spreading kindness, advocating for the vulnerable, and honoring his sister's legacy with every word. In late 2018, the Foxes were invited to Washington, D.C. Melissa was asked to headline a panel on interrogation reform. Kevin would sit beside other exonerees and speak about the deep cost of being wrongly accused. Tyler came, too. On the flight, looking out at the clouds, he whispered, "I wish Riley could see this." Kevin and Melissa each took their hand. She could, and through them she already had. Their presence in the Capitol was more than symbolic. It was a declaration. A family once shattered by injustice was now leading the call for reform. They answered tough questions with honesty, not anger. They didn't want revenge. They wanted change. Back in Wilmington, that change had already begun. The school district launched a trauma-informed program called Safe Harbor. A local church installed a bench by Forked Creek, dedicated to Riley and all missing children. On the plaque were simple but powerful words: "May every child be found safely." At the dedication, the Foxes stood side by side, Tyler between them, as the town joined in quiet remembrance. Riley's memory had become more than a personal grief. It had become a movement. Even as their work grew and recognition followed, the Fox family never lost sight of why it all mattered. Riley wasn't just the reason behind the change. They kept her spirit alive in every word, every effort, every moment of quiet strength. A girl who loved ketchup, adored her brother, and found magic in the simplest things was now a name tied to justice and reform across the nation. But behind every speech and every signed law, grief remained. Kevin still woke in the dark, hand reaching for a child who wasn't there. Melissa still dreamed of Riley's laughter echoing down the hallway. Tyler, growing into a young man shaped by both sorrow and purpose, still wrapped himself in her pink blanket when the world felt too heavy. They had turned unspeakable pain into undeniable progress. The Riley Fox Foundation had helped change legislation, train officers, support families, and protect children. The Protect. Every word act was no longer just an idea. It was the law. Riley's story had become more than a tragedy. It had become a force for good. On the 10th anniversary of Riley's passing, the Fox family returned to Forked Creek and stood together in a hush, watching delicate wildflowers drift downstream. No words were needed. Riley's presence was woven into the soft rustle of leaves and the gentle current, a quiet reminder that although her voice had been stilled, its echo still guided them. Life in Wilmington had begun to find its old rhythm. Children's laughter once again rippled across the water's edge, though now parents always kept a watchful eye. The simple plaque near the creek, "May every child be found safely," was more than a marker of sorrow. It had become a promise born from loss. Kevin still woke at night, reaching for a hand that would never be there. Melissa sometimes paused at Riley's photograph on the mantle, tears catching at her throat as she recalled her daughter's bright smile. Tyler, now a young man, wrapped himself in Riley's faded pink blanket when the world felt overwhelming, finding in its frayed corners the comfort of her memory. And yet, from their deepest grief, hope had blossomed. Laws were changed, police procedures were rewritten, families in crisis found support instead of silence. The Foxes had taken unbearable pain and crafted it into purpose, ensuring that no other parent would face their nightmare alone. In those quiet moments by the creek, they felt Riley's spirit in every ripple and breeze. Their hearts remained tender, scarred by what was lost. But they carried on side by side, driven by the knowledge that her life, though far too short, had sparked a legacy of compassion and justice that would outlast them all. How would you have felt if you were in their shoes fighting for the truth? Only to have the system that's meant to protect you fail so badly? Could Riley's life have been saved if investigators had acted differently? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. If this story touched you, be sure to check out our next case. Sometimes sharing these stories is the only way to ensure history doesn't repeat itself. Stay safe, stay alert, and keep fighting for the truth.